Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this edition of RCI-POD. In this webinar, we will be discussing the key messages, findings, and policy recommendations from the book Managing the Development of Digital Marketplaces in Asia, a book edited by Sinyoung Park, James Villaferte, and Joseph Yap. Following the presentation on the overview of the book, a panel of experts will discuss topics on measuring digital platform economy, digital divide, and promoting competition in the digital platform economy in Asia. To begin this webinar, we have with us today Joseph Sleglich, who will give the opening remarks. Joe is the Deputy Chief Economist of the Asian Development Bank. He supports the chief economists in setting the research directions for the Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department. Joe also briefs the ADB board and management on emerging economic issues. Over to you, Joe.
Okay, thank you very much, Roger. Participants, I'd like to welcome you all today and thank you for joining us in this edition of the Regional Cooperation and Integration Policy Open Dialogue, or RCI-POD webinar series. And here we'll discuss the key messages and policy considerations of our recently released edited book volume entitled Managing the Development of Digital Marketplaces in Asia. Digital marketplaces are increasingly becoming more important conduits of economic interactions across the world, including in the Asian Pacific region. They transform the way we work, socialize, transact, and create economic value. As everyone here may have observed, the ongoing pandemic further catalyzes such digital transformation. Against this background, it is crucial to put in place policies that enable economies to maximize the gains from digital platforms while containing the risks as patronage gains more traction. The policy areas range from widening access to promote digital inclusion, e-health, and online learning, to fostering digital ecosystems, ensuring data privacy and security, and preventing cyber attacks. The book, Managing the Development of Digital Marketplaces in Asia, which was released online last December 2021, contributes to the rapidly growing body of literature and policy debate on digital platforms. It includes background papers prepared for ADB's Asian Economic Integration Report 2021, which detail the scope, benefits, disruptions, and implications of digital platforms in the region. The book aims to help policymakers put together effective strategies that promote accessibility to needed technologies and meet the challenges of the ongoing digital transformation in order to fulfill the goals of a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific region. We all look forward to the discussion with the authors and editors of the book, as well as with our invited guest. Having said that, I would like to congratulate the team behind this timely and relevant undertaking. And to everyone here, thank you again for attending this RCI-POD webinar series. Roger, back to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Joe, for that opening remarks. Now, to present an overview of the book, we have with us James Villaferte, who is a senior economist at the Southeast Asia Department of the Asian Development Bank. James conducts research on economics and regional cooperation issues in Southeast Asia and leads the third policy network of economists. He writes economic outlook and risk assessment for Southeast Asia, and he examines its medium-term macroeconomic outlook, policy, and development issues. James, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roger. Good day, everyone, and I'm really happy to be back in my original department, economic research. And today, I'd like to share with you some of the key messages from our book, Managing the Development of Digital Marketplaces in Developing Asia. While we're waiting for the PowerPoint to launch, as Joe mentioned, this is actually a sequel to the 2021 AEIR team chapter, Making Digital Platform Work for Asia. And what we've done is we've generated 14 background papers to prepare the team chapter, and we've selected 9 chapters to comprise the books. Chapters 1, 2, and 3 basically covers the definition and aggregate economic contribution of digital platforms. 4, 5, and 8 covers the contributions from three sectors: e-commerce, fintech, as well as crowdwork. And then the challenges and disruptions are discussed in chapter 6, 7, 8, 9. Next slide, please. In this book, one of the difficulty when we were doing this book is actually there's no hard and fast definition when you talk about the digital economy. And as you can see from the drawing, there are narrow scope, broad scope, and very big digitalized economy scope. But what we've done in this book is basically the digital economy in our treatment basically comprises of three characteristics. One, it's technology mediated. So digital marketplaces or digital platform are technology mediated. Second, they function as a matchmaker between supply and demand of the market. And third, they facilitate the delivery of goods and services. So that's how we define the digital economy in this study. Next slide, please. And to bring you some statistics on how important digital platforms or digital marketplaces are in the global and in the Asian economy. I think the first study that was conducted on this digital economy is actually by the UNCTAD in 2017. And they noted that the market capitalization of digital platforms for companies with market cap of over 100 million reached almost 7 trillion in 2017, which is about 20% of global GDP. So in our study, we measured business to consumer revenues of digital platforms. And what we've noted is that in 2019, globally, business to consumer digital platform revenue reached 3.8 trillion, which is about 4.4%. If I'm not mistaken, let me just check. 4.4% of global GDP. And in Asia, Asia accounts for about half of that, 1.8 trillion. And that comprises around 6% of Asia's GDP. The US accounts for about 22% of global B2C revenue, and Europe accounts for another 12%. So you can see here the importance of digital platform and the big role that's played by Asia. And in our study, we covered 6 sectors, and the biggest, of course, you can see the one with the cart. That's actually e-commerce. That's more than half of the revenue of digital platform. And in Asia, the business to consumer revenue is about 1.1 trillion. Next slide, please. In the study, we also conducted a simulation to analyze what's the impact of rapid digital uptake. So we saw during the pandemic, when the pandemic came in, that because of mobility restrictions and the need to minimize face-to-face contact, there was the use, adoption, and trust in digital technology was actually rising. So we asked the question, what if the usage of digital input actually increased by 20% in the 5 years to 2025? How will it affect output, employment, and trade? And when we analyze this question, what we realize is, aside from the increase in investment on digital inputs, this introduction of digital transformation will also increase productivity. So in the literature, the approximation is for every 10% increase in digital usage, total factor productivity will increase by around 1 percentage point. So aside from the 20% increase in digital investment, we also shock the productivity. And what we realize is that if we do that globally, output globally would increase by around 4.3 trillion every year from 2021 to 2025. And that's equivalent to the 2020 5.4% of the 2020 output baseline. For Asia, the yearly increase in output is about 1.7 trillion, which is equivalent to the 2020 6% of the 2020 GDP. So these are really huge number. In terms of global employment, this increase in digital inputs plus increase in total factor productivity will create a new jobs of about 140 million yearly, equivalent to 5% of the baseline 2020 employment. And for Asia, it will create additional 65 million jobs yearly. So those are big employment impact. And the same impact on trade. So for global trade, we estimated that global trade will increase by about 2.4 trillion a year, which is about 5.5% of the 2020 trade level baseline. And for Asia, it's trade will increase by about 1 trillion a year. So you can really imagine the large potential benefit of digital transformation. Next slide, please. So chapter 4 of the book actually focuses on e-commerce. And what you can see from here is that e-commerce as a very significant and direct link to trade linkages. And in the book, we provided empirical evidence to show the positive association between the rise of e-commerce development as well as consumers goods trade. And this relationship has become stronger over time. In light of this increase in e-commerce, in the volume of e-commerce globally, the chapter 4 actually discusses four new policy areas which are very critical for supporting this development of e-commerce. One is policy improvement in policy and regulations to address issues with cross-border data flow, improvement in digital payment to address the cross-border movement of money, as well as the implication for cross-border taxation. Then there's also the implication in terms of improving the systems and processes, as well as investment in customs administration, because e-commerce has actually changed the importation of goods. Now it's becoming more parcelized. And last but not the least, the chapter also discussed the importance of free trade agreements. And in that regard, also more specifically, the role of the digital FTZs, which I think China is the first one to develop the digital FTZs, and now Malaysia is also developing it. Next slide, please. Chapter 5 of the book actually discusses fintech, and we know that fintech is actually growing very rapidly in the book. And what you can see from here is that the use of cashless payment in terms of options for cashless payments, uh, card and e-money has been growing and has a large share. If you look at the top portion, the red line, that's actually the share of cashless payments done through card and e-money, and you can see for both emerging and developing economies, they're quite large. And the share of, for example, card and e-money in total payments volume, at the bottom, you can see that e-money, the green one, specifically for emerging economies, are also increasing. And we in the book we've actually empirically provided a strong relationship between the development of fintech and the development of e-commerce, because as I said, you cannot really have e-commerce without availing of this e-wallet to support your transaction in the app. So I think this fintech makes payment system easier, transparent, and also more inclusive. For example, we know that most of about 90% of the initiative to improve financial inclusion are related to the development of digital payment system. Next slide, please. Now, in chapter 6, actually, chapter 6 discuss one of the first key policy challenge that's associated with digital transformation, which is the digital divide. And we know that if you look at this chart, there are actually four kinds of barriers. And at the bottom of this is the by Van Dyke 2006. At the bottom of the chart is actually the motivational, the behavioral, and sometimes the cultural aspect that actually impedes our access to technology. No, so there are places, there are age group with inherent mental barriers in terms of accessing, and I think, for example, older people tend to be less savvy with the technology. And then the next level is actually the material access. Material access means either they don't have the access to internet, they don't have the access to smart devices. That's why they cannot really avail of the benefits and productivity offered by this digital platform. And then the third level of impairment in terms of access is actually the skills, and you have several skills barriers there. You can have in terms of not knowing how to use the smart devices. We know older people like me. I'm a granddad, and usually whenever I can use the basic functions of the cell phone, but for more advanced usage, usually I'll go to my kids who are quite fast, or even my nephews and nieces. No, and because our ability to control the instrumental devices are limited. And last but not the least is sometimes there's also divide in terms of usage of access. So in the book, what the book suggests is that these four levels of divide are quite important if you want to really maximize the benefit. And basically, the book recommends that number one, we develop indicators to measure the degree of divide across the different countries in terms of these four indicators. and they really hammer on educating people, especially the older ones and the younger ones, and then improving investing in technology to increase material access. Next slide, please. Chapter 7 of the book, and we have with us people from the Philippine Competition Commission, talks about the competition challenge, and one of the biggest, I think, fear, especially when digital platform and technology companies come in small economies, is that policymakers have the concern that they will actually uh, pose a challenge, especially to the small traditional business. And there are four reasons why digital platforms tend to be a natural monopolist. One is usually the asset requirement for a digital platform is quite large. Most of these big digital technology are actually billion-dollar industry, so they're quite large. And the main reason for that is that one, I think for you to be able to invest in those technology which are quite data intensive and built on value arising from the monetization of data, is the importance of investing in the digital hardware and software. So the data intensiveness actually requires that most of these platforms are quite large. And then, of course, there's also the network effect in the digital platform, where the more participants there are in a platform, the larger the value that you can derive from that platform. And of course, advanced economy digital platform from the US or China, they usually are the ones with the biggest users there. Therefore, they have large networks. For example, if you look at the top 70 digital platform globally, probably 90% of them would be originating from the US or from China. So that's how concentrated the digital platform industry is. There's also extreme increasing return to scale when you produce and sell goods in digital platform. And that again could naturally leads to a natural monopoly. Usually the switching cost between digital platforms, I'm sure you know, you have different apps, right? So once, for example, you've logged into Lazada, for you to shift shopping to the other digital platform, you have to transport your data. Switching costs are not low. Especially most digital platforms, they invest so that they create this what you call walled garden. No? So like you're captured in this very nice walled garden, and you don't want to leave that walled garden, because this walled garden actually provides many complementary services which new platforms cannot provide. So you're locked into that digital platform. So in the book, I think the book identifies about 9 policy initiatives to address this competition. The most important, I think, is one is policymakers in the region need to support digital entrepreneurship, so that local competitors and local startup can actually begin equipping local business in the digital economy. Minimizing the barriers to entries are also important. Improving their access to resources, both financial and technology, are quite important. Supporting capacity building activities like hackathons, trainings, networking, uh, to build the knowledge base of local entrepreneurs are also very important. And so are, for example, reviewing some rules on mergers and acquisition, because we know that these mergers and acquisition sometimes even contributes to this monopolistic structure. No? Like, for example, in the Philippines, when GCash was acquired by Ant Financial, that was actually, I think the Philippine Competition Commission actually reviewed that merger and acquisition, because we know GCash and Ant Financial is a big player in the fintech industry regionally, and GCash is a big player in the Philippines. And I think, but I think usually, because in terms of competition, I think there's in Europe and in North America, there's a preference to really strengthen the antitrust regulations and mechanisms, so that even before issues about competition arise, you already have the incentives for firms to be more competitive. And last but not the least, they also want to promote interoperability and the sharing of data across platform. Next slide, please. Chapter 8 then actually talks about crowd work, and this chart shows you how digital platform actually contributes to the creation of jobs. And if you look at the left hand side chart, the yellow ones, services, you can see the two types of crowd work that's being created. One on the left hand side is what you call the cloud work, which is basically web based. So these are actually like computer programming, freelancing, editing. There's some micro taking crowd work, content value creation in terms of multimedia. And then on the right hand side, these are all actually gig work that are location based. These are services that are being rendered physically, like transportation, food delivery, house cleaning, accommodation, etc. So the like if you look at the top 15 countries in that actually benefit from this crowd work, most of them are actually from Asia. So the top three are actually India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and you can see in terms of the type of gig work, it's more of the cloud work that's the biggest. The blue one is actually software development and technology, and the dark orange is actually creative multimedia content, multimedia. And there's also some growth in terms of the sales and marketing support, basically the back office support, and also clerical and data entry support. But this picture actually does not include the jobs that are being created through the food delivery, or for example e-hailing, no? So that's actually labor on demand that's being created. So in the book we also provided some numbers in terms of how much labor are created there. But one issue in terms of this issue, in terms of this crowd work, is that most of these workers are not workers anymore. They are actually categorized as independent contractors, and that actually has a good thing. It makes the work environment, the delivery of work, more flexible. You can do it on your own time, but at the same time, it has eroded job and income security, and that's becoming a big concern. No? For example, sometimes these crowd workers or these gig workers would also invest in terms of asset, and sometimes there are changes in market structure which would actually affect them in terms of their exposure to those acquired assets. So for example, in the Philippines, when Uber was acquired by Grab, right? And then there's an over surplus of drivers. Some of those drivers who bought cars on loan actually were exposed to that risk. So in the book, some of the discussion on what are some of the policy remedies so that the issue of job and income security can be addressed. So there they said we should have a more digital, portable, and flexible labor social protection policy. And they also discussed the possibility of even relying on universal basic income. Although in the book they said that they show the pros and cons of the universal basic income, because UBI, which is quite good in terms of providing an unconditional cash support to vulnerable workers, the problem there is some people said that they can actually act as a disincentive to work. So there's a big argument in terms of what are the pros and cons of using this UBI to support or augment social protection for crowd workers. Next slide, please. Um, and then, of course, one of the issue with digital economy is that uh, the adoption and use of technology and the reorganization of business online actually makes and complicates the identification of taxable income and taxpayer. And this has actually created tax leakages and tax loopholes. And this is the base erosion and profit sharing, which is covered under global agenda in G7 and even in the OECD. And for example, just to show to you how difficult taxing digital economy are, if you look at the chart, there are no countries that implement uh, and has mechanism for collecting VAT or GST for low value goods from online trade. So most of the when you order a parcel, actually they are tax free, because most economies don't have the mechanism or don't have the law to collect the VAT or GST. I think now some countries are uh, actually redefine the minimal value on which some tax will be applied. Uh, on the second column, like for example, even if you look at the simplified registration and collecting mechanism for digital economies, only 6 economies in the region, and these are actually the rich economies, have those existing regulation, registration and collecting mechanism. So it's quite really difficult, and there are 3 characteristics of digital platform which makes the collection of tax quite difficult. Number one is a digital business doesn't have to operate in an area, so they don't need to have a physical presence in the Philippines. For example, if I order online, say for example, ticket from online travel using one of the flight app, that sale will not be registered here. That sale will be registered in online. And then so what's the jurisdiction in terms of taxing them? The second is there's an extensive use of the monetization of data, and in our laws, taxing data and taxing the money derived from data is not yet well developed. And the third one is the business models of the digital platform. They are actually in the cloud, and it's quite difficult to characterize their income for tax purposes. So last slide, please. So in conclusion, to conclude, I think the book identifies 6 policy priorities to really maximize the potential benefit from digital platform, and also manage the cost. And the first one is really we need to invest in invest in ICT infrastructure to make access to ICT affordable. We also need to develop uh, a safe and secure e-payment system and digital options, because we know that this is an enabler of the digital economy. Third, because there's also a physical interface for the digital platform, investing in logistics and delivery infrastructure is quite important. And you know this, right? For example, during the pandemic, one of the issues with digital apps when you order is that there's a limited number of drivers, no? So there's a big delay when you don't have a strong logistic and delivery infrastructure. And then, of course, in addressing the digital divide, investing in digital skills and literacy and training through providing ICT access to smart devices and e-learning hubs are important. In terms of addressing the base erosion, profit sharing, regional cooperation, to come up with better, effective, and more efficient taxation policies and options are also quite important. And last but not the least, because globally now, actually, cybersecurity and data privacy have been flagged as one of the top risks. We also need to develop smart regulations to ensure that the rules and regulations on data privacy and cybersecurity are safe and sound. So I'll end here and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, James, for that comprehensive presentation of the key findings and policy considerations for the book. So now we will proceed with the panel discussion for today's webinar. The panel discussion will be moderated by Thomas Abel. Thomas is the Chief of ADB's Digital Technology for Development Unit, which promotes the effective use of digital technology across ADB programs to improve development impact. His team also works with ADB member countries in supporting the transition to digital economy and provides assistance across many areas, including e-government, tech startup ecosystems, technology policy, and tech industry partnership. Joining the panel discussion today are 4 experts, which I will now introduce. First, with us today is Jose Ramon Albert, who wrote the chapter on measuring the platform economy, concepts, indicators, and issues. Jose Ramon is a senior research fellow at the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. He was the Secretary General of the National Statistical Coordination Board from 2012 to 2014. He was also the Training and Research Chief of the Statistical Research and Training Center and a former adjunct faculty member at the Stephen Sully Graduate School of Development Management. We also have today with us Johannes Bernabe, who is one of the first commissioners appointed to the Philippine Competition Commission in 2016. Prior to his appointment, Mr. Bernabe advised the Philippine legislature in the drafting and deliberations on the Philippine Competition Act. Johannes likewise taught the pioneering course on Philippine competition law in the country's state university. Also joining the panel discussion is Maureen Ann Roselon, former supervising research specialist at the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. Maureen co-authored the chapter on digital divide and the platform economy, looking for the connection from the Asian experience. We also have today with us Crystal Lin Uy, Director of the Mergers and Acquisitions Office of the Philippine Competition Commission since 2016. Crystal previously worked as a litigation and corporate attorney before joining the USAID Trade-Related Assistance for Development Project as the technical legal assistant for competition, where she worked for the implementing rules and regulations of the Philippine Competition Act. To our panelist and the moderator, welcome to this webinar. I will now turn it over to Thomas, who will moderate the panel discussion and facilitate the Q&A. Over to you, Thomas.
Thanks, Roger, and thanks, James, for the great presentation. I'm going to go and ask one question to each of the panelists, and if folks in the audience have questions, go ahead and type them in the chat window. We've already got some, and we'll address those as we go through. So the first question will be to Jose Ramon, your chapter on measuring the platform economy. And we wanted to ask you, given the importance of digital platforms, how do you handle the constraints around getting data from these platforms in order to update the national official statistics?
Well, it's not going to be easy, Thomas. Actually, right now, many countries don't quite have data on platforms because in the first place, they don't even have a commonly accepted definition of what we mean by a platform. And there are a lot of measurement issues regarding the valuation of the platform economy, since some of the platforms, like, for instance, Facebook or YouTube, might offer some of their services for free or parts of their services. So it's not easy to actually find out, how to measure things. Moreover, the platforms themselves might not be physically located in the country concerned, so the economic transactions might not even be part of national economic statistics. But even if we could create within a country a complete list of what are the platforms in the country, gathering data from platform economies might not be quite readily feasible. Well, sometimes we might need to be more creative, perhaps use big data to actually get a sense of what's happening. Or if they're in the country, they might be forced by laws in a country to actually set up the branches and give information to the statistical systems. But the more complicated matter is, sometimes the specific economic activities, the classification code for platforms may not even be available in the statistical system. Platform companies might be part of a business register, but they might not be included in the industry in which they are active. For instance, they might be put in other industries. For instance, take Grab or Uber. It might be thought of as providing a transportation service, but what if you ask the Grab or Uber rider to actually buy something for you? It's no longer just a transportation service. So it becomes very complicated. Platform companies might be likely included in ICT or trade, but their work is very cross-sectoral, and they might not straightforwardly fit into official classification systems such as industry classification codes. So it's really very complicated for statistical systems to actually generate information.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's almost like we're going to have to create a whole new way of dealing with it. I remember just recently an article about a court in Australia answering Facebook, who claimed that they had no business presence in Australia, and it was these kinds of things happen because the platforms have to take all the advantage they can of the legal environments that they're working in. So thanks for that. Next question will go to Maureen, who wrote the chapter on the digital divide and the platform economy. And Maureen, we would like to hear a little bit about your key findings and messages on the digital divide. And we also had a question around the gender aspects of that.
Oh, okay, thank you. So what in that chapter we looked at digital divide in Asia and found gaps in terms of material access, skills, usage, which could affect engagement in digital platforms. And these gaps in access are connected with the demographic characteristics. So there's gender, age, education, income. So if I may refer to some findings, we find that internet penetration rates and digital literacy, digital skills are higher for males than females in general. Although we see some breakthroughs in some parts of Asia like China, the Philippines, and Vietnam, where females are having better digital access. And then in terms of age, the older age people, the older age group are participating less in digital platforms and having the lesser digital skills, while on average, those in the 24 to 35 years old age group, they spend the most time in platforms, and including e-commerce and e-payments. And in terms of material access, so physical device and internet connection, we see that those in the higher income levels and those who have more assets, and also those living in the urban areas would have higher computer ownership and also digital literacy. And then within the digital marketplace, we also see that, well, there's observation that there's a divide being created within the platform. For instance, in terms of well, because of what related to the ownership of assets and also location. So, for example, Airbnb. In the paper, we mentioned a mapping of Airbnb postings in Seoul, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and another city, and it showed that the concentration of postings are in the central districts and business areas. So it seems to show that the platforms may be benefiting more those in the commercial areas or those who are better off than the periphery. And then finally, we're seeing that the divide that's being observed in the demographics and also within communities and then within the digital marketplace could create more inequality in income, in economic opportunities, or access to health and education services, for example. And given these gaps, I think the digital platforms are not able to provide or distribute the benefits equitably. So there's there's disproportionate distribution of benefits. And yeah, that would be maybe some key messages.
Great, thanks. I think this is a key. The pandemic especially has shown, that it's so critical for people to have access to these platforms, and if there's a digital divide, then it really becomes more important. And and the divide is worse for, as you said, for gender and rural versus urban, and these are core development issues. So our next question will go on to the Promoting Competition, Chapter 7, with Crystal. And Crystal, the question is, what do you think policymakers should consider for mergers and acquisitions in the region, especially when a platform is operating in multiple countries and each country is trying to manage their own competition, their own competitive marketplace while handling these regulations on companies that are regional or global?
Okay, well, I think there's a lot that can be done. We all know that mergers in digital markets would always span across, different countries, and this can actually be challenging for merger review enforcement. So it is important for the region's antitrust authorities to respond to these issues in a unified and cohesive manner. In that is why collaboration and cooperation between all these different agencies are needed. Alongside with cooperation, we need to build up capacity. In the 2021 study of the World Bank Group, which actually looked at all the antitrust cases involving digital platforms worldwide, they found that developing countries may have had a more reactive approach to analyzing cases in the digital economy, but more high-income authorities have been more proactive. And characteristics of the digital markets and platforms, like, for example, multi-homing, zero price behavior, the use of algorithms, the winner takes all dynamics, have not actually been frequently looked at by authorities in developing countries. And this also includes, of course, data-related issues, which are an important part of the production process of the digital platforms. So the use of data transparency, data privacy and protection, and data as a barrier to entry. So antitrust authorities in less developed countries should participate, I think, more actively in the debate on data protection and privacy as one of the dimensions of competition. And the capacity of antitrust agencies to calibrate traditional antitrust tools to account for the multi-sided nature of markets, non-price dimensions of competition, and also look at consider possibilities for killer acquisitions whenever they review transactions should be done. And then another thing is we know that mergers involving digital platforms would less likely trigger a review by the antitrust authority because of insufficient assets or revenues that will meet the traditional thresholds for merger notifications. And in this regard, well, it might be useful to take a look at the current thresholds that we all have and see if there is some room to update that, similar to what Germany and I think Japan has already done. Another thing that the region's policymakers can do is maybe collaborate, or in their own countries, launch a digital market inquiry, similar to what the UK, Australia did, Mexico, in order to map out the current landscape of the digital economy and identify the key competition issues. And if there are intervention points that are needed and ex-ante measures are required, similar to what the EU is proposing right now, then perhaps that's something that should be on the table and something that will be up for discussion. That's it for me.
Great, thanks, Crystal. Yeah, I think this is an area where we can look at what some of the countries are doing in the region and hopefully create harmonized approaches so that the regional commerce can proceed without too much disruption. But it will be difficult because every country is in a different competitive situation and different regulation. So the next question will go to Commissioner Barnaby, which is really about what do you think are the key policy priorities to promote development of platforms and effective competition between among the digital platforms?
Thank you, Thomas. I'd like to say a lot, but I think my colleague in the Commission, Crystal, has stolen the wind from my sail. She has covered a great deal of the issues I wanted to cover, but perhaps to amplify on 2 or 3 points. The first is what is critical in the burgeoning digital platform economy is really who controls data. And to the extent that data is controlled by first movers or emerging dominant players, then you want to be able to ensure that such data is not used to perpetuate practice of self-preferencing or to lock in users into these ecosystems or walled gardens, as James has more eloquently put it. So priorities that would allow access or better control of data by users of platforms have to be prioritized. At the same time, that control has to be balanced with informed consent in terms of if it is going to be made available to other potential entrants into the market for digital platforms, then it has to be on the basis of fully informed consent by users. Now, the related question here is, while we are mindful of ensuring control and informed consent by users of the data that they share with platforms, at the same time, you want to make it easier for new entrants to be able to access this data as well, because otherwise the data which is in the hands of the few incumbents or the first movers will effectively create, as we said earlier, walled gardens or perpetuate nascent dominance in these digital platforms. So the other question that will have to be addressed is on where there are already dominant incumbents, not necessarily from the Philippines or even the region, but let's say the GAFAs of the world, the Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple ecosystems. How do you intervene at the local level on that? For us in the Competition Commission, it would seem like there is good precedents being set by regulators in other countries or other competition authorities, and it might be useful to again steal a page from them in terms of not having to reinvent the wheel. For instance, in the EU, they have a series of do's and don'ts for digital platforms, for e-commerce platforms. So for instance, the mandate to allow third parties to interoperate with gatekeepers' own services in certain specific situations, or not to allow, for instance, users from uninstalling any pre-installed software or app if they wish to. So these are the kind of specific regulations, do's and don'ts, that should guide gatekeepers that are large enough to act as such when they operate digital platforms. In the US, they have a slightly different approach where they want a structural separation where they prohibit dominant intermediaries from operating in markets that place the intermediary in competition with the firms dependent on its infrastructure. For instance, you would find that Amazon should now not be preferencing or self-preferencing or even competing through its own white labels against merchants who market through Amazon. And I think that in that context, the Philippines should probably learn and anticipate the kind of regulations or guidelines that we should put forward for these digital platforms. The last point I'd like to emphasize on this is, while all these tools or approaches are evolving internationally, and while it would be useful to try and anticipate what might be adaptable here in the Philippines, or while it may be wise to focus on how to handle data, at the same time, I think that the timing of when to intervene is also going to be critical, because you don't want to intervene as a competition authority just when the sector is beginning to grow and evolve. For instance, the reference was made to the Alipay acquisition of Globe's equity in GCash. The question there was, among other things, should we approach the merger with the heavy hand of regulation? Or should we just allow it to grow and let the market grow? Of course, we might argue about whether or not we should have intervened at that time. Now we see that there is an emerging dominance of GCash, probably as a payment mechanism, of Lazada, which is an allied company owned by the same ultimate parent beneficiary of Alipay. And one wonders really when to intervene and say, we will put our foot down and say that you cannot proceed with the transaction or you cannot proceed with a certain practice without the competition authority weighing in with remedies or conditions. So that's a very crucial element of it. And of course, that happens, or that has to be applied on a case-to-case basis. And there's no straightforward answer on that.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. And that's very wise, because I agree that you have to act at the right time. And maybe now, with I think the consumers around the world realizing that, that these monopolies are in place and that their data is being not necessarily used in the best possible way, competition-wise, that there's a groundswell of public support in all regions to make improvements now that that these services are available, and it won't necessarily disrupt the the rollout of the technology. So hopefully those things can be lined up, and lessons can be learned, because in pretty much it's all the same companies that all the different regions are having to deal with, either locally or regionally. So we only have 5 minutes left. I want to ask one question for all the panelists, and feel free, not everybody has to answer, but we'd like to get at least this one question, which is, what role do institutions like ADB or other regional global institutions play in supporting digital marketplaces and supporting them for a sustainable, inclusive economic growth? Anybody want to take that?
Yeah, I can start. So currently, countries are really having difficulty, grasping measurement issues, and it would be, and because of this issue that I was already mentioning, that platforms may not be physically located in a country where there might be some transactions happening. It might be important for some kind of regional surveys to be conducted, and perhaps ADB together with other international organizations might actually want to be the ones to actually conduct these kinds of regional surveys. And of course, ADB has given the work that it has done now with this book, together with other international organizations, can also help capacitate countries in understanding, because I'm a statistician, I think that, we need countries to understand statistical frameworks so that countries can start measuring the platform economy with their current surveys, new surveys, and also with big data.
Great. Thanks, Jose Ramon. And Commissioner, you're next.
Yes, thank you. Two things. First is, I think government, rightly or wrongly, should take the lead in terms of promoting e-commerce. And one way to do that is by doing things on its own, in its own governance functions electronically. E-governance was a term which was mentioned earlier. And I think that ADB can facilitate, along with other multilateral institutions, the transition from the current traditional way of governance using pen and paper to one which is digital based. And this will accomplish a myriad of things as well. It will allow more streamlined regulation, better access by those in the province and the countrysides to government, which is always seen as being centered in Manila or in the commercial hubs. So facilitating e-commerce through the leadership of government by promoting e-governance, I think can be done with the help of ADB as well as other multilateral institutions. Secondly, I think this book, along with other papers and publications of the ADB and other institutions, can be more widely disseminated. forums can be organized in partnership, for instance, with the competition authority or even other government agencies to spread the message in this book and to make everyone on board the e-commerce train, not just in terms of using it, but understanding the issues and making sure that government is held accountable to make sure that the regulations and the proper promotion of e-commerce are put on the table. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, we're happy to do that and want to carry this forward as much as we can. Maureen or Crystal, do you want to take a stab at that question? We have
Yeah, sure. Just to add to the answer so far, I think it's important to have pro-competitive measures or regulations that will be in place in the region. You said earlier, we talked about a little bit about the fragmentation of laws and regulations that actually prevent antitrust authorities from credibly and efficiently dealing with the digital sector and discharging their obligations. So ADB and a lot of institutional organizations can help government agencies in doing capacity building and help craft their regulations that will open up the digital space for the country. An example is the BSB's Open Finance Framework, which is very cutting edge, and we want to see more of that from the government agencies, and ADB can definitely help with, since it has the expertise, it has the resources, it can help with crafting those rules and regulations and frameworks. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
So yeah, maybe quickly, efforts or support, I guess, could be focused towards having more inclusion in the marketplace. So those related to bringing connectivity to the unreached or the underserved. And aside from that, I think it's important to promote digital literacy and skills. I think it was emphasized in this webinar, and I think it's important to have that, to be able to access, to use the internet and the digital platforms more meaningfully, and use it to enhance welfare also. So yeah.
Thanks, Maureen. I'll thanks for all the panelists and all the participants. I'll hand it back to Roger and James to close out the webinar.
All right. Thank you very much, Thomas, and as well as to all our panelists, Jose Ramon, Crystal, Maureen, Commissioner Johannes Bernabe, as well as to Joe and James, who presented a while ago. So thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed our discussion today on this virtual launch of the book, Managing the Development of Digital Marketplaces in Asia. The book is now downloadable at the ADB as well as ARIC websites. For next week, we will also have an RCI-POD on February 24. We will examine then the key outcomes of the 2021 Asia Pacific Financial Inclusion Forum report on emerging financial inclusion priorities in the COVID-19 era. So please join us again next week for the next edition of RCI-POD. Again, thank you very much to all of you, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you.